And we are back on the 0 hour. You know, every time our next guest comes on, I feel compelled to come up with another metaphor for what he does, because what he does is such a hard way to make a living. He studies the madness on the right as well as the biases in the press. So this time I'm going to say that our next guest pans for nuggets in the toxic rivers of the American psyche. He does it so you don't have to. Eric Boehlert is a senior fellow for Media Matters. He's the author of Bloggers on the Bus, How the Internet Changes Politics, and Lapdogs, How the Press Rolled Over for Bush. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Luckily, we have a nice staff that helps me, too.
Oh, good. Okay, because
they actually do most of the mining, thank goodness.
Oh, yeah, because that's a tough one, I'll tell you. I mean, I don't know how you decompress from that at the end of the day, if you like wave burning sage over your head or something.
I've been doing it so long, unfortunately, it's kind of a permanent state of mind.
Well, let's talk, then let's dive right into it. And let's talk, first of all, as always, thanks for coming on the show. It's always great to have you.
No problem.
And listen, let's just dive right into it with what, to my mind, is the craziest story yet. Okay. While everybody's talking about, in the press, I mean, about emails and whatnot, Clinton cash and so on, we have a presidential candidate. Well, I'll let you tell the story of Jade Helm, or is it Jade Helm 15? They really thought we were going to take over Texas.
My only regret is Glenn Beck is not still on television, right? I mean, this is just springs. This is so Fox News 2009, 2010, and it's sort of this very disturbing strain of insurrectionism. You know, the American right viewing the U.S. military, our men and women in uniform, as the ultimate enemy, because the Obama administration is going to use the military to wage war against its own citizens. Its citizens have to be armed. Its citizens have to be ready to wage war against the Army, Navy, Marines. So this really does spring, and I'll get to the details in a second, it really does spring from the imagination of Glenn Beck. What's so amazing is as we fast forward from 2009 to 2015, is that it's been completely indoctrinated by the Republican Party, not just Alex Jones, not just crazy people who make stuff up to cash a paycheck on Fox News, but the governor of Texas, Republican candidate. So what they're talking about is this military operation that's going to take place in Texas. It's part of this common Pentagon, I don't know, practice sessions, whatever you want. I'm using
training exercises.
Training
I think
exercises.
they call them. Yeah.
It's gonna unfold over several weeks or months. It happened. This one's, I think they're based in North Carolina. They're going to head to Texas and they're going to, do their training sessions. And the right wing Tea Party militia crowd has decided it's all part of a larger plot to essentially invade Texas, take away guns, strip the citizens of its freedoms, etc. And so, crazy tinfoil hat, crazy stuff. But then you have the governor of Texas confirming all of this or legitimizing all of this, and essentially sending, communications to his National Guard saying, "Hey, I want you to watch these guys. I want you to make sure we're not invaded by federal forces." Ted Cruz going on record saying, "I understand why Texas are concerned. I understand why they don't trust the U.S. military," and things like that. So it's sort of the kind of the ultimate conspiracy. But again, what makes it so toxic and head-shaking is it's not just talk radio. It's not just, Fox News when Glenn Beck was there spinning these crazy things. It is some of the highest levels of the Republican Party legitimizing this sheer insanity.
Eric Boehlert, this is why I always love having you on the show for the clarity that you bring to this. And the reason why I say that is not to butter you up, but because, look, I mean, looking at the right, to me, it's a little bit like those optical tricks you see in the paper. Do you see a vase or two old ladies looking at each other? It's very easy, I think, for a lot of us to see the right and the Republican Party if we're not part of the roughly third of the country that buys that madness. It's very easy to see them as just ludicrous and silly and somewhat amusing, except for the political consequences of what they do. But that's the two women looking at each other. But what you see, the essence of it is, and what you remind me of when you come on, is it is really, as you say, it's frightening, because now we have a two-party system, and one of the major parties is really validating, as you use the word insurrection. Candidly, I would also use the word treason. When you're arguing whether it's Clive Bundy or whoever it is, when you're arguing violent resistance against against our armed troops, our men and women in uniform, and against the people who serve the government as postal workers or what have you, I call that treason.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Clive Bundy, because 13 months ago, where were we? The center of the political universe was this ranch in Nevada, where Tea Party enthusiasts basically blocked off the highway, had snipers on the overpass, harassed federal workers, and announced that they were willing to wage war because this guy wouldn't pay his cattle raising fees. And so that became mainstream because of Sean Hannity and because of some, Tea Party Republicans, that, radical insurrection was completely embraced and completely championed as sort of this rib rock Republican mentality. Now, I've seen some quotes from, back to the Jed Helm in Texas. I mean, I've seen some quotes from, what used to pass as conservative Republican leaders in Texas, attorneys, former state officials, people who've made a ton of money being Republican in the state of Texas, which is, one of the easiest things to do. But, essentially serious people, people who went to law school, people who kind of take public policy, seriously, don't think it's a joke. And their comments are, they're utterly ashamed, utterly bewildered. They can't understand, what happened to the Republican Party that they were, a part of just 4 or 8 years ago in Texas, a very red, very conservative state. And they don't recognize what's going on. So, it's important, it's scary, but it's important to understand, people, Media Matters, we monitor all this misinformation. Oh, who cares what, the crazies on the right, who cares what Alex Jones is saying? This stuff, whether it's Jed Helm, whether it's climate denial, whether it's, the criminal justice system, whatever, it is now accepted orthodoxy in the Republican Party. And by the way, they control Congress.
Right.
I mean, Media Matters has endless examples of how this Looney Tune initiatives that start on talk radio, that start on Fox News, end up being, we have hearings and we have laws being voted on and passed 9 months later. So there's a very dangerous hand-to-mouth that goes on. So you can't just dismiss this sort of right-wing craziness because... And
this is where, Eric, just, to pivot a little bit, we're talking with Eric Boehlert of Media Matters about Jade Helm, the belief that the U.S. government was thinking of invading Texas. First of all, I don't think they realize it's already a part of the United States of America, so there's no need to invade. It's already been annexed. But secondly, let's pivot to the media side of this, because here's what gets me about this. They will marginalize Raul Grijalva as, part of the extreme left for espousing positions that most Americans share, or they'll call Bernie Sanders a socialist, or as I mentioned earlier, they'll obsess on Clinton Cash or whatever. But it's a rhetorical question. I'll preface this. Where is the media in not saying that for weeks a major Republican presidential candidate,
Right.
Ted Cruz, was actually espousing radical, fringe, lunatic ideas that encourage violent revolution against the federal government? I mean, it's as if a major Democratic candidate, it's as if Hillary Clinton embraced the new Black Panther Party and said
Right.
there should be violent insurrections in the streets of Baltimore, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it absolutely is. Look, particularly since Obama was inaugurated, I mean, the hard and fast rules of the D.C. press. It's sort of like the Fight Club. You don't talk about how radical the Republican Party is. I mean, you simply don't. It's not part of the conversation. That word is never, ever used. And we have countless examples of how they soft pedal this stuff. And so, yes, the New York Times did a piece this week on Jed Helms. Yes, they basically interviewed people who thought it was nuts. But that's it. It's sort of the beginning and the end. Here's 1,100 words. Oh, this is an unusual circumstance in Texas. And they basically only interview Republicans, and they find some Republicans who think it's kind of strange, and that's the end of the story. They never connect any dots. There's never an attempt to weave a story about how this Republican Party has gone so radically far to the right and has, in many cases, completely out of step. Whether it's the radical obstruction, whether it's the refusal to vote on Obama's cabinet members, little things like that, or in terms of, climate deniers and things like that.
Or a committee chairman saying Washington is here to serve the banks. To me, it's look. We all know the game, or you and I do. They want access to these guys. They'll lose the access if they call them radical fringe nuts. But they don't even tend to report on this stuff. It seems to me if you're going to make a headline out of a Democratic candidate's associations 30 years ago. Well, okay, maybe we could argue whether that's a legitimate story or not, but if you're going to do that, why don't you make a headline out of a Republican candidate's statement this week? Don't call it radical, just say Republican presidential candidate explores possibility that there could be a federal invasion of Texas. Why isn't that a New York Times headline?
Right. You would think, right? But again, so you can't describe Ted Cruz as radical. You can't describe Scott Walker wanting to essentially eliminate the safety net in Wisconsin as radical. These are just, but if the Clinton Foundation, a global charity, takes in too much money, then it's Katie bar the door. So it's hard to put into words in terms of the amount of excitement and anger there is in terms of the two different approaches.
It is hard to put into words. Look, I mean, you can cover the fact that to raise money for the Clinton Foundation, they met with person A or person Y. But then why don't you cover the fact that in order to curry support with their base, Republican presidential candidates are hanging out with people who have violent intentions towards the Bureau of Land Management. They want to pop a cap in Smokey the Bear's ass, basically. Right. And why don't you cover that? I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you're talking about access, if you're talking about money, if you're talking about seeking favors, I mean, the idea is basically the Koch brothers are just giving this money out of the goodness of their heart. They want nothing in return. Walmart wants nothing in return. Adelson wants nothing in return. So only the Clintons are guilty of selling access. Only when Democrats raise too much money is it based out of corruption and things like that. In terms of the dark money pacts that Rubio and Bush and Walker have set up, none of that is of interest. But anytime the phrase Clinton and Ford and Cash is mentioned,
Last rhetorical
let's not
question.
Even get started, on the New York Times and how they decided to get into bed with Murdoch in the Clinton Cash book.
Oh my God! Well, listen. Last rhetorical question on this is: for all their coverage of the Clinton Cash guy, have they ever run a headline on the fact that Marco Rubio got hundreds of thousands of dollars from the for-profit prison industry.
Right. Yeah. No, they haven't, and the New York Times hasn't run a headline about how the Clinton Cash book has about 24 errors that Media Matters has documented in it.
And have they run a headline about how the Clinton Cash author spoke to a Koch brothers gathering?
No. So they got into the bed with a Murdoch, a hyper-partisan author who has his book published by Murdoch. The book is riddled with errors, and the Time won't concede any of that. Look, there's something very, very weird going on. Dylan Byers at Politico wrote a piece yesterday saying the D.C. media has never been more prime, quote, to take down Hillary Clinton.
Wow.
Why is it that the press openly discusses how it's prime to take down the likely Democratic nominee? Have we ever heard a single conversation on TV or in print about how the press despises Marco Rubio, can't stand Jeb Bush, wants to take out Scott Walker? Those discussions would get you fired. But it's a very common conversation to talk about how the press hates the second most famous Democrat in America today.
And I know, and unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there, but I will just say quickly that I asked one Washington reporter on this show whether she thought Rand Paul was a nice person, and that entire media outlet has refused to send anybody to me ever since. So there's some things you're allowed to say and some things you're not allowed to say, I guess, and it just shows how slanted this stuff is. Well, thank you for staying on it. Thanks to all of your staff for wading into this stuff. I hope you guys have hazmat suits on hand. And Eric Boehlert, Senior Fellow with Media Matters, as always, great to have you on the show.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.